Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Aquarian Series tonight. Our presentation is entitled Krishna, Christos, which will be given to us by David Grossman, our friend out of ULT, New York.
Thank you. Okay. Friends, the title of our subject tonight, Krishna Christos, is of course the coupling of two names, not just any names, but names that reverberate across countries and civilizations, deep into the fabric of human history. Names that resonate in the hearts and minds of really millions upon millions of people, East and West. Names that represent divine incarnations to many. Names that bring peace, inspiration, and meaningful direction to people's lives. We know two of the world's great religions revolve around Krishna and Christos, the latter referred to, of course, as Jesus the Christ or Jesus Christ. The term Christos being around long before it was conflated and made synonymous with Jesus. Some Gnostics spoke of Jesus as a great prophet, a great teacher, who was overshadowed or illuminated by the Christos. Just as Jesus answered the Pharisees when asked, "When will the kingdom of God come?" He answers in Luke 17:20, "God does not come with observation, for indeed the kingdom of God is within you." We find in Isis Unveiled on page 153, book 2, Madame Blavatsky writes under the heading, "When a god becomes incarnate," she says, "the ancients never entertained the sacrilegious thought that such perfected entities were incarnations of the one supreme and ever invisible God. No such profanation of the awful majesty entered into their conceptions." Christianity is the largest in numbers of all the religions. Hinduism, whom Krishna, of course, is connected with, the third largest and considered the oldest religion. And within both religions, there are those that see them as God, having more or less the personal God idea, which was pointed out by HPB and really throughout the writings that this does an injustice to, to the highest. It limits, dwarfs the real majesty of the unnameable, unspeakable essence of life. In terms of what these beings represent, the inspiration and teachings they have given us are synonymous, basically, in purpose and intent. And it is no coincidence that the compilers of the Aquarian Almanac picked this title at the time of year of the winter solstice, the time of the yearly rebirth of the sun, Surya, the central life-giving force of our solar system, which represents the source and sustainer of life, the power of being, and the illuminating flame of consciousness. So these great beings, teachers and inspirers of mankind, are truly solar beings who come onto the scene from time to time to illuminate the rest of us, to encourage us, as Krishna encouraged Arjuna to carry on even, or maybe especially, in the darkest of times. The winter solstice, which is the darkest time of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, also represents the hope of a new year, a new cycle of life, manifesting so beautifully in nature during the arrival of spring. On the occult or interior side, it is the time we learn when the astral light is young. And thus it is no coincidence that the new year is the time to make resolutions, start new impulses, because between now and the vernal equinox, spiritual, mental, or psychic energies put forth have an added force to them. This is an example of the working with the laws of nature on the inside. HPB points this out in an article she wrote in the January 1888 Lucifer magazine, and you're probably familiar with this, some of you. She said there, "Let no one imagine that it is a mere fancy, the attaching of importance to the birth of the year. The earth passes through its definite phases, and man with it. And as a day can be colored, so can a year. The astral life of the earth is young and strong between Christmas and Easter. Those who form their wishes now will have added strength to fulfill them consistently." And as we all know, December 25th is celebrated by Christians as the birth of Christ the Savior. HPB points out in this same article that it is also on December 25th, Christmas, the day with the Christians on which the Savior of the world was born, that were born ages before him, the Persian Mithra, the Egyptian Osiris, the Greek Bacchus, the Phoenician Adonis, the Phrygian Attis. And of course, we should go further and link other names that have been great benefactors of mankind, influence us, great teachers, what we could call enlightened beings, such as Buddha, Mohammed, Kuan Yin, Lao Tzu, Pythagoras, and others who have been and still are teachers and inspirers of humanity along our journey into the higher realms of being, collectively and individually. And as we are uplifted by these shining ones, we too help, or should we say, are capable of helping to uplift the lives that make up the lower kingdoms, evolving toward the human state in the somewhat distant future. It might also be noted that there is a reciprocity at work between all beings and kingdoms. We as humans are supported by the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms as they make up and support our physical instruments. And this is why sometimes our instrument, which we need to work on this plane, is referred to as the temple of the soul. Aside from much darkness that seems to surround the life of our planet at the present, we also live in a time full of knowledge and possibility. To think, just a few centuries ago, most people were illiterate, and now we have the power to communicate with our fellow beings instantaneously. Where not only is language less and less a barrier, but also time. But even more wonderful is the fact that we have the teachings from a succession of these great ones available to us from different eras and cultures. And thanks in part to the second object of the modern theosophical movement, we have a key that shines a light on the fact that there is the self-same spiritual river that flows beneath and within the great religions, philosophies, and sciences, sometimes referred to, as we know, as the perennial philosophy. Take arguably, as one student put it, the best self-help book ever written, where we are introduced to the Bhagavad Gita, the wisdom of Krishna himself. Yet it's the treatise that's thousands of years old, but only available to us in the English-speaking world since 1785, thanks to the topographer and Orientalist Charles Wilkins, who translated it. And it was he who introduced it through publication to Emerson and Thoreau, who then helped spread the word concerning this philosophical gem, not to mention William Judge's work in that regard, rendering and publishing the Gita and the notes and his commentaries to it. An awareness of this amazing and beautiful reciprocity that goes on, interconnection and root oneness of all humanity and life, expressed in the present wisdom tradition, can only help to heal the psychic wounds and distortions caused by what HPB called the dire heresy of our time, separateness. You know, we forget at times just how interconnected we really are, even with those we least relate to. And we're reminded of this in The Voice of the Silence, where it says, "Thou shalt not separate thy being from being and the rest, but merge the ocean in the drop within the ocean. So shalt thou be in full accord with all that lives. Bear love to men as though they were thy brother pupils, disciples of one teacher, the sons of one sweet mother." And some thoughts that connect with this we found from that little Buddhic gem, Letters That Have Helped Me, thoughts and writings from W.Q. Judge. He says in there some very interesting things. He says, "A long chain of influence extends from the highest spiritual guide who may belong to any man down through vast numbers of spiritual chiefs, ending at last in the mere teacher of our youth. Or to restate it in modern reversion of thought, the chain extends up from our teacher or preceptors to the highest spiritual chief in whose ray or descending line one may happen to be." And then he goes on to say, this chain of influence is called the Guru Parampara chain. And at least in a relative sense, Krishna Christos represents the top of the chain, the bright, fully unfolded human ego illuminated by Atman. So these beings, they are not meant to be objects of worship, but rather subjects of inspiration. And it is through the collective memory of evolving humanity we find the stories of these great ones, whether symbolic or actual, mythic or historical, expressing a pattern of truth, sometimes referred to as the savior archetype. Yet it's unfortunate, but there seems to be a kind of flaw in the lower human psyche that even in spiritual and religious circles wells up often and says things like, well, my truth is better than your truth. There can only be one true expression of what is real. Others must be false. Yeah, somehow we seem to lack the moral imagination all too often to realize that from the one white light comes all the colors of manifestation. We feel we need to have a corner on truth, meaning we have the only true teaching, we have the only true way. What we don't realize is that the central teaching and teacher, or sometimes called Messiah, shows more depth, not less, through the same or parallel expressions in other religions, myths, and teachings. We could argue there are no singular events in nature. Life unfolds through cycles. This day, the result of a previous one, just as this life, the result of previous incarnations. And aside from the universal teachings connected with both Krishna and Christ, such as in the Bhagavad Gita and the Sermon on the Mount found in the Gospel of Matthew, there are many stories about them. The mythos or mythoi built around them, if not identical, are very similar, as if to let us know there are layers of meaning within them. Kind of like what we learn through the theosophical teachings, all true universal symbols actually have 7 keys. We've been able to turn a few of them. So, excuse me one second. One parallel that has caused partisan arguments between the two religions of Hinduism and Christianity from time to time is the similarity of the two names. Since Krishna was around long before Christ, some have always said early Christians built the Jesus story around Krishna. And there have been Christians who tried to show Krishna to be much more recent than he was and took the name from Christ. But scholarship over time has pretty much disproved that idea. As mention of Krishna is to be found in many places BC. One in particular was from the 6th century BC in the Chandogya Upanishad. It refers to Krishna there as a sage and a preacher. It seems today the most agreed upon scholarship points out that first, the two names are derived from two distinctly different languages, Christos, and Christ from the Greek, and Krishna, meaning dark, from the Sanskrit. In Isis Unveiled, HPB has other thoughts on this, but since theosophists don't tend to believe in coincidence, we might better call it an interesting kind of synchronicity for the moment. The biographical sketches, if you will, of these two avatars, benefactors of humanity during this Kali Yuga cycle we find ourselves in is quite interesting, and there are a number of parallels we could make. Here are a few of them. Both are considered divine incarnations by the adherents of Hinduism and Christianity. Hindu philosophy teaches the philosophy of the periodic incarnation of avatars, Krishna being one. Many Hindus today, though, treat Jesus as one also. Orthodox Christians, on the other hand, are still caught up in the singular event theory often, lacking the idea of continuous spiritual growth, one life being wholly inadequate to bring forth and express our innate spiritual dimensions. One life, as it's been put, is just a wink, a blink in the eye of eternity. And that one short life being the beginning, middle, and end of it all makes no logical or intuitive sense concerning how the universe works, more or less the why of it all. Each is a divine incarnation from a triune God. Both represent, both Krishna and Christ, the second place of their respective trinities. Krishna, the 8th incarnation of Vishnu, as in Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and Jesus, the Son, as in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. As most of us know, Hinduism teaches the doctrine of the periodic incarnation of avatars who come to help along evolving humanity. Many Hindus, we are told, consider Christ to actually be one such avatar. And thus, besides having pictures of Krishna on display at home, some also have images of Christ. Both Krishna and Jesus are said to have had miraculous births, and both were predicted to come. Another parallel, both Jesus and Krishna were hidden and moved away as infants because they were at risk of being killed. This is the stories about them. Jesus by King Herod. We learn in the Gospel of Matthew, King Herod found out that the Jewish Messiah, some thought, was born, who was being called King of the Jews, a title Herod had used for 30 years. And so he tried to have this infant killed, Jesus, so there would not be challenges to his authority. And Krishna, he was born in prison to devout parents, Devaki and Vasudeva. And this story goes, at the time of his birth, his life was in danger because the tyrant Kamsa, who was also his uncle, was seeking to kill him. Why? Because it had been foretold that Kamsa would be killed by Devaki's 8th child. And we know who that was, right? That was Krishna. He was the 8th child. So being aware of this, they were able to smuggle him out of prison to be raised by his foster parents in a cowherding community. And thus we sort of have that parallel between Jesus with the shepherds and sheep, and the cowherding community with with Krishna. And we see this in other areas, these parallels. Just as a quick aside, we learn in the Jewish Bible that Moses too was hidden at birth for 3 months due to the edict by the Pharaoh to kill all Hebrew male babies at the time. And the rest is kind of Jewish history, so to speak, concerning Moses as the key spiritual teacher there, and really a channel for the highest, later delivering the Ten Commandments, as the story goes. So there are stories of both Krishna and Jesus being challenged and attacked by Satan or demons. There is the well-known biblical happening when, after his baptism, then fasting on the desert for 40 days, Jesus is confronted and tempted by Satan, and he is victorious through this ordeal. Krishna, on the other hand, who's, you might say, the stories of Krishna, there are many mythic stories about him. But he was confronted and attacked by various demons during his life, coming out victorious each time. The earliest, when just a baby, Utana, a demoness who was sent by Kamsa to appear in the form of a beautiful woman to kill baby Krishna by breastfeeding him poison, but who was killed by the deity when he sucked her life force out and was liberated. And there are many other stories of the young Krishna warring and being victorious with a number of demons. In fact, the whole comic book industry developed around the exploits of the young Krishna, the kind of spiritual superhero. Each of these avatars performed what are referred to as miracles. We students of theosophy would say that things that are actually explainable with an understanding of the occult laws of nature, which we learn about in the theosophical writings, of course. And finally, both Jesus and Krishna predicted their own deaths. So we have all these parallels between them, and many of these could be found other places. In fact, some of the parallels just mentioned and more can be found in a very interesting chart in Isis Unveiled, book 2 on page 537, if you're interested, titled Legends of Three Saviors, Krishna, Gautama Buddha, and Jesus of Nazareth. And it's kind of interesting, Krishna being the first, she spells his name in that particular place, Chrisistna. Okay. Yet aside from other parallels we could list, without a doubt, the most important parallels are the teachings themselves, attributed to both Krishna and Jesus through their words and lives that are still with us today. Each teacher comes at a particular time and to a particular culture to begin with, their teachings having a certain emphasis and form of expression deemed to be most needed and helpful to the people of the time and to, we might say, the health of the particular philosophy or prevailing religion of the time that needs revitalizing. Yet there's also an underlying universal aspect that is powerful and useful to evolving humanity across time. And I think that's why we see many ancient writings that we find still have a vitality and a beauty to them, thousands of years later, hundreds of years later, even though language has changed and phraseologies have changed, they seem to still carry a power with them. And as we mentioned earlier, although the Gita has been around for thousands of years, it has only been available to us, that is in the English-speaking world and European languages as well, for just a little over 200 years. It has an amazing impact, really, when you think there have been nearly 300 English translations of the Bhagavad Gita. And it is in over 75 languages. And the Mahabharata, the great epic where the jewel of the Bhagavad Gita is placed. As a whole, that was only translated into English in the late 19th century. We read, just as a little footnote, Eknath Easwaran's translation of the Bhagavad Gita is the best-selling English edition in the US, at least at present. A few parallels from the teachings of Christ found in what is usually referred to as the New Testament and teachings of Krishna found in the Bhagavad Gita and other places in the Mahabharata. We thought a few of these might be worthwhile to compare and show their unity. In the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 10, verse 20, Krishna says, "O Arjuna, I am seated in the heart of all living entities. I am the beginning, middle, and end of all beings." And we find in Revelations, in the King James Version, "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which is to come, the Almighty." And then in chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita, verse 17, "One day of Brahma lasts 1,000 cycles of the 4 ages." Excuse me. And his night also extends for the same span of time. The wise who know this understand the reality about day and night. And from the Bible we read, "Beloved, do not let this one thing escape your notice. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day." In the judge rendition of the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 6, we hear, "He who seeth me in all things, and all things in me, looseneth not his hold on me, and I forsake him not. And whosoever believing in spiritual unity worshipeth me, who am in all things, dwelleth with me in whatsoever condition he may be." And we find in the book of John 17 that all of them may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. And again, in the judge rendition in chapter 2, we're familiar with this phraseology for sure. "When in every condition he receives each event, whether favorable or unfavorable, with an equal mind, which neither likes nor dislikes, his wisdom is established. He is confirmed in spiritual knowledge, when like the tortoise, he can draw in all his senses and restrain them from their wanted purposes." And we find an echo of this in Matthew 6. This is from the King James Version. "But thou, when thou prayest, enter into thy own closet. And when thou hast shut thy door, pray to thy Father which is in secret. And thy Father which seeth in secret shall reward thee openly." You know, when approaching the various teachings, could say of Krishna and of Jesus in the New Testament and in the Gita and other places, there are things that sometimes are not so well understood, that seem contradictory unless we have a key to help us. So there are those who can't understand. They seem to be contradictory to the general teachings of these great ones, all of a sudden show up there. There are those, for example, who can't understand, at least at first, why the spiritual teachings of a great avatar like Krishna, an example of love and compassion, why his teachings would be delivered on a battlefield, to encourage his disciple to slaughter the nearest and dearest to him. It can seem contradictory to a spiritual vision. And this is how Arjuna felt at the beginning of the Gita. We hear the distraught words of Arjuna at the opening. He's, when I shall have destroyed my kindred, shall I longer look for happiness? And in the judge rendition, he goes on, I wish not for victory, Krishna. I want not pleasure. Having killed the sons of Dhritarashtra, what pleasure, O thou who art prayed to by mortals, can we enjoy? Would we destroy them, tyrants though they are? Sin would take refuge with us. It therefore behooveth us not to kill such near relations as these. We know later on, Krishna tells Arjuna, fight. And we learn that he's talking about fighting for the spiritual life, the higher life. And similarly, there is the statement by Jesus that has been very confusing to many Christians, coming from the one who tells us to turn the other cheek and to love thy neighbor as thyself. And rightly so, if we take the words of Jesus always literally. As in the Gita, we need the key which shows this war to be within every person on his or her own battlefield, his own Kurukshetra, the battlefield of form and duality, of personality versus spiritual individuality. And so we hear these strange words in Matthew, at least at first strange. He says, think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and the daughter against her mother. And a man's foes shall be they of his own family. And he goes on like this, and he goes on to say, he that loveth father and mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth me after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. So we see in both cases here, there's a kind of irony that goes on. And in Theosophy, we learn through study that part of the key to understanding this is in the dual nature of Manas. And this to understand that we can look into the higher and be pulled also down by the lower by this within the same principle to some degree helps to resolve some of these contradictions. Yet, of course, the fact remains when we call for the light in life, we also call on the darkness. Another way to put it, when truth is declared, the status quo, the false structures, both personal and societal, based on materialism and personal self-interest, are threatened and hold on for dear life. And an example of this happening in a way, and HPB was certainly aware of this when she made her first major theosophical foray into the world of contemporary thought. All 3 points of the triangle, religious, philosophical, and scientific, with the publication of Isis Unveiled, she could see the storm clouds forming around her and inevitable backlash when the entrenched ideas of the day were challenged. And thus, she ends the preface to Isis Unveiled with the salute of the Roman gladiator to Caesar. Moritures te salutat, we the dying salute you, or death, we salute you. And just as HPB challenged many of the orthodoxies of the day, then and now, so does Christos challenge us with the vision of what a human being can be and with an inspired alternative for conducting our lives, for conducting ourselves with our fellow beings. And although to some degree, being born into these physical bodies in Kali Yuga on this plane, I mean, life is suffering. There is suffering in life. But as the Buddha tells us, mostly we suffer from ourselves, and that we have the power to alleviate it. We can think really of no better example than someone who embraced the spirit of Krishna Christos than Mohandas Gandhi, of course known as the Mahatma Gandhi. He very directly embraced both the teachings of Jesus, especially the powerful effect he tells us the Sermon on the Mount had on him. To quote him, he said, "The spirit of the Sermon on the Mount competes almost on equal terms with the Bhagavad Gita for the domination of my heart." He tells us that his philosophy of ahimsa, nonviolence, which includes thought as well as action, was greatly influenced by the teachings of Jesus, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, which he felt should be applied by all in everyday life, and were not meant just for the disciples gathered there when it was preached. The Gita presents a spiritual path for the everyday person in the world and shows that one does not have to abandon the world and go to the proverbial mountaintop to cultivate the spiritual life. This is, as has been pointed out by various commentators of the Bhagavad Gita, part of the great gift of the book. It presents those truths that we can each cultivate and apply wherever we find ourselves in life. Gandhi's long practice and application of the teachings presented by Krishna in the Gita are well known. And as most of us already know, although born to a Hindu family, Gandhi did not know the Bhagavad Gita as such until, as a young man in England, he began to study it with theosophical friends. And thus he was guided from a relatively young age during his active and tumultuous life. He was a quiet warrior in the spirit of Krishna Christos and has had a continuous positive impact in the world by way of example and, of course, the teachings and writings that he left us. So we can only really finally say that Krishna Christos is essentially the spiritual soul, the Atman, the shining light deep within every human being, gently pressing forward to manifest itself in each of our lives. If we take the theosophical vision that all beings throughout all the kingdoms of nature, visible and invisible, are on a spiritual journey, and that a point comes when each individual, each of us, begins to take up this path consciously, it is then that the Christos, the neophyte, the disciple, begins the process of conscious transformation and initiation toward and into the Christos. When, after throwing down his bow and arrows, Arjuna picks them up and works toward becoming one with Krishna as a spiritual force, eventually transforming our world into an environment that will one day truly host the golden age. And as a last word for now, we can do no better than to draw from the opening page of part 1 of The Secret Doctrine, titled Cosmic Evolution, quoting from maybe the most ancient of spiritual teachings, the Rig Veda. It says there, "Who knows the secret? Who proclaimed it here? Whence this manifold creation sprang? The gods themselves came later into being. Who knows from whence this great creation sprang? That whence all this great creation came, whether its will created or was mute. The most high seer that is in highest heaven. He knows it, or perchance even he knows not. Okay, so
Thank you,
is
David.
yeah, have
What a
time for a
gift.
little discussion here.
That was a magnificent gift. Thank you so much. Are there any comments or questions? David, I was interested in this parallel thing that you were talking about, and I think at one point you said that by looking at one of these uh, divine incarnations helps us get insight into the other ones. And then you proceeded to draw all these parallels in terms of, you know, how they were born, how they're perceived, how the politicians were challenged, et cetera. And then also in their teachings. I was just wondering if you could go into that some more. Well, there's just so many questions I had from that. But I was just like one thing that the Dalai Lama does, where he talks about how the crucifixion of Jesus is actually quite a bit like the Bodhisattva ideal, for example. Um, and
Right.
he draws other comparisons,
Yeah.
you know. But I was just wondering if you could go further into these kind of comparisons. And you've done a lot already, so.
Well, you know, what comes to my mind when you say that a little bit, one thing maybe that can help us each to make meaning out of those is to embrace these things as our own.
Yes.
Not in some, big way, but we each carry our own cross. Just as an example, using the Christian one, we each have to carry our own cross. We each have to go through the desert, and we can see, and then we can. I remember saying once it was said that when we sit, we should sit as Buddha. It doesn't mean we are Buddha, but we should
Mhm.
assume the position that
Yeah.
if we don't assume the position that we are spiritual beings, how can we call on our higher nature? But the trick is not to get caught up in the lower nature in doing that, if you know what I mean. You
Yeah.
know,
One thing that I was thinking of that kind of also kind of grabbed my attention is when you said that Gandhi said that the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount
right.
competed in his heart for dominance, did you say? Anyway, an
Yeah,
important place.
I don't think you used the word dominance, but
Yeah,
it
that
was
would, anyway, an important place. Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Yeah. And
Well,
so is that something we should cultivate where we really try and kind of walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and actually kind of go there?
well, for me, I think absolutely, and I think one of the beauties of the theosophical teachings is the fact that all these different expressions kind of shine a different facet on the
Mm,
diamond of the soul, and we, if we start thinking always in the same terms, the same expressions, the same terminology, we get locked into the forms, and what the teachings can do is help us to shatter those forms and find the pearl within them. And that's why I was trying to get at a little bit earlier in the talk about how it's so easy to fall into, we have a corner on truth, but what we really have is we're locked into a certain way of seeing the world, and we need to break that. Yeah, it's easy to embrace someone who agrees with you. It's easy to preach to the congregation. We all can fall into that kind of trap. But to really listen to someone who's quite different than us or who we wouldn't naturally, rub shoulders with necessarily, I think that's probably where the growth in learning and coming in touch with our fellow man can probably be the most effective and helpful. And it's not easy to, it's not always easy to do, that's for sure. Yeah. I think Robert Moore, I see, has a.
And Monica's.
I'm sorry. You want to call for questions? Why don't you do that, Jonathan?
Oh, well,
Thank you. David, this was just wonderful. Thank you so very much. I have two things. First, regarding Mahatma Gandhi's uh, two different passages in his heart that he seemed to say that they were almost in competition with one another. The Sermon on the Mount, and I failed to write down what you said about what section of the Gita. So if you could tell me that. And then the other thing was you had some this idea of moral imagination, which is just a gorgeous term. Could you talk a little bit about that, about what that means? How do we cultivate it? What does it mean if we are cultivating it or not? Or just how does that work?
I think it really has to do with just opening ourselves up to the realize that it's a moral universe, that karma works. There's cause and effect, and that we do reap what we sow, rather than how shall we say, judging others by their acts in a sense, and putting our kind of stamp of approval or disapproval on them. We have to open ourselves up to the needs and the trials and difficulties of others. It's very easy to criticize someone who's in a certain state. Could be these are things we usually think about, a drug addict, a gambler, someone who we say, oh, they're superficial, but we don't know, what demons other people are fighting. And we should, like I was saying, in the quote from The Voice, we have to connect with other beings, that there's a higher being there also, and it's hard to do that sometimes when we're in that dualistic type of judgmental kind of state. And just one last thought on that, it's darn hard not to get into that state in the world we live in. There's so many pressures and things going on against us. Every day you pick up the phone and you wonder if there's a scam on the other end. I'm saying all this stuff just kind of, really tests our metals. But that's why we're here, to be tested. If we take that, that's one of the wonderful things that I think the spiritual path tells us, that everything we do every day doesn't just come out of nowhere. There's a purpose. There's something to be learned from. I remember the statement by William Judge that every event of life has an occult significance.
Wow.
That's powerful.
Wow,
And the more we can, our lives become much more fruitful, the more we can see something like that. Yeah.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
What about the Gita? You did with the
Well,
Sermon on the Mount, and did you?
well, the Gita in general, that was a book when he first started doing it again, Well, what was an interesting way it was put. If you're familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, it lists, the Beatitudes, and it lists, this moral high ground, which is, a difficult thing to live. The Gita is a key on how to live it. So that's, those two go together so well. The Sermon on the Mount, if you read it once, it really is inspiring, but it's difficult. But the Gita, with is living the life. That's what really goes on in the Gita. But like we were pointing out, one commentator I read once put it this way. He said, before the Bhagavad Gita, if you wanted to cultivate the spiritual life, you had to abandon the world, go to the mountaintop, be the yogi in the cave. But the Gita changed all that. And that came out. It gave people the knowledge to be able to live their lives where they find themselves and in action. And doesn't Krishna say in the Gita, action is ultimately better than inaction of the right sort? So, yeah, I
Thank
find
you.
that interesting and helpful.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Robert's hand is up.
Yes, your presentation was a bit like a song, like a Gita. So we're very thankful for that. My question is that HPB says both Krishna and Christos are terms that refer to the highest self, the Atman.
Um,
And yet they're appellations for beings that lived upon the earth. They were incarnated. So is this a term like the Buddha, the awakened or enlightened one? And is it because they're able to manifest the highest self in the world of that we live in, that they're called by these names?
I mean, that's kind of how I see it, Robert, the way you actually just expressed it. These seem to be examples of what we are aiming for ourselves. Krishna and Christo, I mean, in Christ, yeah, these were beings, I mean, from my understandings, although it's hard to pin down Jesus also, Krishna is the more sort of mythic, wild figure in the writings. He did, the young Krishna with his flute, and he lifted up islands to save people and did all kinds of wild things. And he had many wives. He was a very colorful figure. So that's one side of it. But then you have the Bhagavad Gita. I mean, ooh, really this teaching, that's unmistakable. And Jesus, of course, we have the Sermon on the Mount, we have the parables, the example of his life of the sacrifice. This has gotten all kind of twisted and materialized to a point, unfortunately, for a lot of people. But and especially at the time, I think this is my personal opinion, but at the time when HPB was writing, especially, there was religion and science, and everything was really locked in. She was pretty hard on Christianity in a lot of ways, and the problem with that might be for some is to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater and not really look to see what's really in there, and there's a lot, and that's what we were trying to bring out some of that tonight. But yeah, these are living examples.
But it is kind of like, well, if we compared it since the solstice to the sun, or their sun gods,
Right, yeah, exactly.
that their lives and their teaching are like lights, only spiritual light.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, definitely so. Yeah, and I mean, again, like what you were talking about earlier, Jonathan, that's what's so interesting about the study of mythology. And of course, HPB did great stuff on that, and we've had a few later scholars that helped us, like Joseph Campbell and some of Jung's work in psychology. It's just amazing what's in this comparative mythology, and how it's also within us. Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions here? No.
Come on, all you fearless ones. I'm sure you've got a question.
Well, I do have, keeping up with you is certainly a wonderful uh, thing, and I did all together with some of what you said. But you talked about other beings in history who,
Yeah.
like Krishna and Christ, anchored that force and that power. And we know from Buddha and Muhammad, Pythagoras, Lao Tzu, but you named a few others that I wanted to write down, but it went by. But you said Osiris, uh, Mithra. Could you just name a few?
Oh, well, these were, these are beings that supposedly, actually was HPB who where I got that from, mentions that these beings also have the December 25th birthday, like Adonis and Mithra and Osiris and Attis. And the point was that they all fit the the form. Yeah, it's no coincidence that Jesus was placed on at that time. And of course, we know it's the winter solstice, the birth of the sun. That's what we were trying to get at. I don't know if we got that across or not, but
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
So December 25th. So it's um these these were also like the two we focused on tonight,
right.
avatars.
Of that nature, it would seem. Sure, Osiris. You hear about Osiris and the Egyptian. I'm familiar with Osiris pretty well. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Uh,
Laura?
uh,
Are we as a humanity any closer to realizing that all these different expressions are from the same one root? And if we're not, what is preventing humanity from seeing that unity that exists within all the religions and the myths? And how can we help to break down those barriers that prevent that seeing?
right. Very, very profound question. One I ask all the time. Yeah. Like I was trying to bring out in some ways, all the ancient teachings, throughout the ages, we have access to them right now. It's really amazing. We have the ancient Vedas we quoted from, we have Plato, we have Pythagoras, we have all of it right here with us. And there are people, maybe more than in the past, that see this kind of synthesis working. But on the other hand, we're more locked. We're also at the same time in this dark Kali Yuga time where we're just so caught up in this terrible dichotomy of things I mean it's we're told this is where we're at. Maybe we don't want to face it sometimes. It's a very materialistic and dark time in some ways, that we also have the means to work our way out of that, but it's going to take some time, it seems. I don't know. I think philosophies like theosophy and other variations do give hope and keep the light burning in the world.
Well, I think HBB, she called it the leavening,
Very
a
nice.
little leavening. And
A
maybe
little,
as students of that understand the unity and see that unity that you expressed, all we can do is keep it visible as much as we can.
right. Yeah.
Until the bread rises.
Right, until the bread rises. We have to keep kneading that.
Yes, that's right.
That dough, yeah. I know you've heard this. I've always loved that little saying, it gives strength sometimes, that it's better to light one candle than curse the darkness all the time, at least doing something positive. Yeah, and it does have an effect. I mean, positive things do show up in the world, even on Fox News, even on CNN, wherever, whatever your taste is. Yeah. Oh yeah. You have something, Ken?
Uh, yes, yes. thank you, David, for that wonderful presentation, all those comparisons and analogies between Jesus of Nazareth and the Krishnos and the Krishna from the Hindu religions. I was wondering about the pre-Christian and pre-Hebrew Gnostics that you mentioned, that they had this
Right.
Christos with a K kind of idea, or
Right.
the CH Christos, and they had the idea that the Jesus of Nazareth prophet was overshadowed by this Christos energy. So when did that Christos concept come into play? Do they have some writings that?
Well, there are. I mean, HPB made this comment that there would be discoveries of it. She actually said this somewhere. Maybe one of you remember that things would start showing up to prove certain things. And what happened in the 20th century, the Dead Sea Scrolls showed up, the Nag Hammadi scrolls, and that's where a lot of the Gnostic teachings we have access
Oh,
to.
yes.
These first century, maybe somewhere even before that, but first to third century writings, which we call the Gnostic writings, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip. And I didn't really go into those tonight because those pretty much are almost straight theosophical teachings. In a way, they really focus on that Jesus taught that now that God is within, that the truth is within, and there are many quotes from those books in. You can get them in the Nag Hammadi writings. There's a whole book that has all those in them, and then maybe you're familiar. There's a very good book by the scholar Elaine Pagels. She really opened things up for a while. She wrote a book called The Gnostic Gospels. She I believe was at Princeton, and wrote a number of books in that area, which really, if you're interested, talks about the early teachings that Jesus may have been connected with. For example, with the Essenes, there was this Essene group, and they found some writings of the Essenes, and some of them are very similar to some of the sayings attributed to Jesus, and they were a group that had equality for men and women, which was kind of unheard of in those days, and they were a healing group. They were healers, and there's a lot of connections, and you can really go out in many directions. There's been a lot of writings, how much of it is true and how much of it is apocryphal. You have to figure out for yourself. But the Gnostic Gospels are definitely real writings that were found, and some of them were burned. I don't know if you know the story. In like 1945, this in Egypt, this guy was in some cave and he found some pot. Found some pot, and there was all these writings in there, all these papers. But he was cold, and he burned some of them in his stove at home. And so we lost some of them, but the others were saved, and there and years of scholarship put these together and put them out there. Anyway, Truth, you wanted to say something?
Well, thank you for that. I have heard of the Nag Hammadi. I haven't read it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I was interested in your response about it seems to me, first taking into account that a lot of these writings, they have the premise of reincarnation. And so that means that death and birth are kind of tied to each other. And it seems that there's some overlap between the mythology and stories of death and the stories of rebirth, because you have like with the winter solstice, you have where the sun appears to stand still. And so you could consider that a time of death and rebirth.
Right.
And so Yeah, so basically that, and also it's like in terms of like if there was a tyrant or something who wanted to kill a child, or I mean that could also be like an idea. Like if you had an idea to do something, and you know if you let out your secret idea, then maybe other people would kind of distract you from it.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, we're taught that the power of analogy we can learn a lot through, and that most all of the teachings are not really to be taken literally, right?
Yeah.
Like the Gita, you know, the battle is within. If we take all that and move it within ourselves, I've never done this, but all those characters, I guess, actually supposedly, you know, have meaning of various aspects of our own natures and stuff that we might be able to, you know, work with to understand more deeply. Yeah.
Well, I haven't, I'm not, it's not fresh in my mind, the details, but it just seems like I'm be curious for the overlap between the stories about resurrection and then the stories about like persecution of the child. Like it,
Right. There's been a lot of those, right? Uh,
Or
well,
hiding the child,
what's
say
that?
that. Yeah,
hiding the child
Oh,
from
hiding, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Because the hiding of the child and then the
right.
when the sun stands still for 3 days, is that like the child is hidden? That, thank you, Monica. That was kind of,
Oh, yeah. I'm sure you can make that parallel, right? And you know, what's it say in the voice of the silence about the child, not childlike? What am I thinking of? The oh, loving deeds the child, like loving deeds the child. You know, the child in it, a child isn't all knowledgeable, but a child has that purity and innocence that as we grow older, you know, sometimes unfortunately gets lost. You know, thinking of the I'm thinking of the poem by Wordsworth, you know, uh, Ode to Immortality, where it talks about as a child grows, it loses its magicalness and fades into the light of common day, as it's put there. I can't remember the whole phraseology, but
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to explore in those areas, and then relating them to ourselves and to the world. Laura, did you want to say something else on that?
Well, it just seems that the voice of the silence is a good reference to that as well. The tyrant is like the lower id, the
All right,
personality, and the child is in the cage, warbling not. You know, it cannot
right,
speak.
right,
So
right.
we see that, and the secrecy too, and the goals that you know the duty of another is full of danger, and it seems that each one has to find this for themselves because it's an inner knowledge. It's not something that is in a book or in the words, but it's something that is within the heart and mind of every being. But
Right.
you know, so
Absolutely, yeah. That's and it's really you can find that periodically in the New Testament. That first quote I used tonight from Luke, you know, he says the kingdom of heaven, you know, it's within. It's not without. Jesus says that in many places, even though kind of the Orthodox point of view in a lot of Christianity is more outward focused. All right. So
It
yeah.
looks like Miluka.
Oh,
Our time is up, but
And
Miluka.
hi, yes,
Luca. Yeah, go ahead.
thank you. Beautiful presentation, very inspiring, well researched. Thank you all. I was thinking that in the secret doctrine, they talk about the infante, they call them masters, the initiates, they call them infants. And in Matthew
Really?
19, Jesus said, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for it is those who are childlike that the kingdom of the heavens belongs.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
So Did you have anything further to say on that, David? Sorry.
Just it just reminds me of what we've been talking about. In some ways, we live in tough times, and somehow we have to be able to. The more we can keep our positive sort of childlike nature, not childish,
Yeah.
for sure, but childlike. That warmth can go a long way to preserve us on the path, to help us along during those times, when Jesus said, walking through the shadow, through the valley of death, right? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to share Percy, his chat. Thanks for the very illuminating talk. I was trying to think of the right word. So that was it, illuminating. And
Oh, well,
just
thank
because something which is illuminating shines light on so many things. So thank you for this wonderful delivery and all of the thought that went into it and all the heart. So thank you very, very much, David.
you.
So
Thank you.
what a
Well,
wonderful preparation.
Thanks
Go
for
ahead.
giving me the opportunity to look into, you throw out those keywords to people, 2 words, Krishna, Christos, it's like the whole universe is there. Where do you?
Yeah, good luck. Here you are.
Good luck. Good luck, buddy.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
Well, gosh, thank you very much. What a
Okay,
wonderful Christmas present that you've given.
okay,
So,
thanks.
our next presentation next week will be irreversibility, which will be, there's this kind of the idea of the Janus where you're looking forward and looking backwards. And in this case, the irreversibility will be like that because it's the end of the year, but it's also the keynote for the next year in the Aquarian Almanac. So it's something very, and it's kind of like the sun does that, right? It's kind of trembles in the balance, with the solstice, and then at a certain point, it's like, okay, we're going, and then the days get longer every day, So there's a certain symbolism in that. So wish you a happy winter solstice.
One
Yes,
just
David.
quick thing, Jonathan, because could you repeat sometime or put it up in the chat? You last week you told us where we could send to get the next edition of the almanac, but I didn't get that.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Truth. This is talking shop here, but Truth,
Right.
we could I just put out in all of these invite emails, just says basically it'll say just reply to the invite email and just say, hey, I want an almanac, and then say your address, and then if you want to give a $15 donation to San Diego Theosophists, then put that. Okay, how would that be? Oh, so we'll send it to you, and then you can mail a check, and we'll figure out a way to do all that. So,
Okay, cool.
Did you
So-
say $1,000?
pardon? Yeah, 15. Yeah. So that's just what it costs to go to what do you call it, FedEx office and make them.
Right.
Nothing fancy. So, all right. Well, thank you all very, very much. Have a wonderful Christmas.
You too.
Did you have anything to say, Monica?
Nothing but thank you and Merry Christmas. Happy solstice. Good year ahead.
Happy New Year.
You too.
Yes,
Happy New
thank you
Year.
all.
Thank
Happy
you, and
holidays.
you
Happy
too
New
all.
Year.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Sure.
Be well and safe.
Thanks.